Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, once the untouchable kingpin of the world's most powerful drug empire, now spends his days in a maximum security prison. His story is one of ambition, violence, betrayal, and justice. From his humble beginnings in rural Mexico to running the Sinaloa cartel, Guzman built a criminal empire fueled by drugs, fear, and corruption. But no empire lasts forever. This is the story of how one of the most dangerous men in history was brought to justice. Joaquin Guzman Loera was born on April 4, 1957, in the tiny, remote village of La Tuna, nestled in the rugged mountains of Sinaloa, Mexico. It was a world far removed from the cities and wealth he would one day command. Life in La Tuna was harsh, isolated, and unforgiving. His family survived on subsistence farming, barely scraping by. Joaquin's father was reportedly a cattle rancher, but he also dabbled in the local drug trade, growing opium poppies, a plant that would shape Joaquin's future. Joaquin's childhood was marked by poverty and a father who was often cruel. His father's earnings were squandered on alcohol, leaving little for his wife and children. Joaquin grew up working the fields, planting corn and beans to support his family. By the time he was 8 years old, he was already selling oranges on the side of the road. It wasn't a choice, it was survival. Even as a boy, he was known for his determination. When his father refused to provide money for school supplies, Joaquin took matters into his own hands, selling whatever he could to make ends meet. But ambition and resourcefulness weren't enough to escape the crushing reality of rural Sinaloa. Many young boys in the area dreamed of something bigger. For some, it meant leaving for the cities to find work. For others, like Joaquin, it meant turning to the one industry that thrived in these mountains, the drug trade. In the rugged Sierra Madre, where government control was weak, opium and marijuana were lucrative crops. Farmers grew them to survive, and middlemen like Joaquin's father traded the harvest for cash. Joaquin watched and learned. By his teens, he had joined the trade himself. He started small, working with local growers to cultivate and harvest marijuana. It wasn't glamorous, but it was profitable. Joaquin stood out early for his ability to work hard and take risks. Unlike others, he wasn't satisfied with being a small-time farmer. He wanted more money, more power, more respect. He quickly earned a reputation as a reliable worker who could get things done. A young man with big dreams in a world where dreams often went unrealized. At this point in his life, do you think he could have chosen a different path? Was it his environment, his upbringing, or his own ambition that led him to the drug trade? Share your thoughts below. As the drug trade in Mexico expanded in the 1970s, Joaquin's determination caught the attention of the bigger players in the region. The Guadalajara cartel, led by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, was on the rise, consolidating power and forming alliances with Colombian traffickers. They needed men who were willing to take risks, who wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to get the job done. Joaquin Guzman fit the bill perfectly. He was ruthless, ambitious, and eager to prove himself. Joaquin started at the bottom, working as an enforcer and organizer, ensuring that drug shipments moved smoothly. He learned quickly that success in this world didn't just depend on hard work, it depended on fear. If a shipment was late or lost, Joaquin made sure someone paid the price. He earned his nickname, El Chapo, meaning shorty, for his stocky build and short stature, but there was nothing small about his ambition. The Guadalajara cartel operated on a scale that young Joaquin could only have dreamed of. They controlled routes into the United States, smuggling vast quantities of marijuana and cocaine across the border. Joaquin worked tirelessly to learn the intricacies of the business, how to move drugs undetected, how to bribe officials, and how to eliminate anyone who posed a threat. He built relationships, earned trust, and showed an ability to think ahead. When others saw obstacles, Joaquin saw opportunities. The turning point in his life came when the Guadalajara cartel began falling apart. In 1989, Felix Gallardo was arrested, and a power vacuum emerged. For Joaquin, This wasn't a setback. It was an opening. He saw the chance to create something of his own, something bigger than what had existed before. With a few trusted allies, he broke away and formed the Sinaloa cartel. It was the beginning of an empire, one that would grow to dominate the global drug trade and make Joaquin Guzman one of the most feared and powerful men in the world. But those early years of hard work and ambition also revealed something else about Joaquin. He had a ruthless streak. He wasn't just building a business, he was building a reputation. Joaquin didn't forgive mistakes, and he didn't hesitate to use violence to enforce loyalty. People who crossed him didn't live to tell the tale. As the Sinaloa cartel expanded, so did Joaquin's legend. He wasn't just a drug trafficker. He was becoming something larger than life, a figure of both admiration and terror in the criminal underworld. The rise of the Sinaloa cartel wasn't immediate, but Joaquin Guzman wasted no time in building his empire. The fall of the Guadalajara cartel left Mexico's drug trade in chaos, with smaller factions vying for control. Guzman saw the potential for something bigger. His plan wasn't just about selling drugs, it was about domination. He wanted to control every step of the process, from production to distribution, and he was willing to do whatever it took to achieve it. What set Guzman apart was his understanding of logistics. He wasn't content with traditional methods of smuggling drugs across the border. Trucks, boats, and planes had limitations. They could be intercepted, and competition was fierce. Guzman needed something better, something that would give him an edge. That's when he turned to the ground beneath his feet. Inspired by the tunnels farmers used for irrigation in his home region of Sinaloa, Guzman masterminded a system of underground drug smuggling tunnels. These tunnels weren't crude holes in the ground, they were sophisticated engineering marvels. Some were equipped with lights, ventilation, and even rail systems to move massive amounts of cocaine, heroin, and marijuana into the United States undetected. Do you think his use of tunnels was pure genius, or was it simply a reflection of the lengths criminals are willing to go to avoid detection? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. These tunnels gave the Sinaloa cartel a massive advantage. While law enforcement scrambled to secure traditional smuggling routes, Guzman's drugs flowed seamlessly underground, earning him billions of dollars. His cartel became synonymous with innovation, outpacing rivals and setting new standards for the global drug trade. Guzman's success wasn't just about clever smuggling techniques, it was about his ability to control people. He didn't just intimidate, he inspired fear on a level few could match. Anyone who betrayed him or stood in his way was eliminated without hesitation. Guzman personally oversaw acts of violence that sent a clear message to his enemies. Defy the Sinaloa cartel, and you wouldn't live to regret it. But power also brought scrutiny. Guzman's growing empire made him a target for Mexican authorities and their counterparts in the United States. In 1993, Guzman's life took a dramatic turn. A failed assassination attempt against him in Guadalajara left a prominent Catholic cardinal, Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo, dead. The murder shocked Mexico and drew intense public outrage. Guzman claimed he wasn't involved, blaming rival cartels for the mix-up, but it didn't matter. The government wanted answers, and Guzman became their primary target. Later that year, Guzman was arrested in Guatemala and extradited to Mexico. For many, it seemed like the end of his reign. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison for drug trafficking, bribery, and conspiracy. But prison for Guzman was little more than a temporary inconvenience. He was sent to the high-security Puente Grande prison, a facility designed to hold Mexico's most dangerous criminals. Yet even behind bars, Guzman remained in control. Through a network of bribes and intimidation, he continued running the Sinaloa cartel as if nothing had changed. Guards, prison officials, and even other inmates fell under his influence. He lived comfortably, dining on gourmet food and enjoying privileges that no ordinary prisoner could dream of. But Guzman wasn't content with just managing his empire from prison. He wanted his freedom. In 2001, he orchestrated one of the most infamous prison escapes in history. The details of his escape sound like something out of a Hollywood movie. Guzman reportedly bribed dozens of guards and prison staff to turn a blind eye. It's said that he escaped by hiding in a laundry cart, wheeled right out of the prison's gates, without anyone stopping him. Others claimed he simply walked out disguised as a worker. Whatever the method, the result was the same. Joaquin Guzman was free. His escape humiliated the Mexican government and cemented his legend. For the next 13 years, Guzman remained a ghost, constantly on the move and always one step ahead of his pursuers. While in hiding, he expanded the Sinaloa cartel into a global empire. His drugs reached every corner of the United States and beyond, flooding markets in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Guzman became one of the richest men in the world, making Forbes' billionaires list multiple times. His wealth was staggering, but it wasn't just about money, it was about power. Guzman bribed politicians, police officers, and even military personnel to ensure his protection. In Mexico, his influence was so pervasive that some communities viewed him as a folk hero, a Robin Hood figure who gave back to the poor while defying corrupt governments. Despite his wealth and power, Guzman's life remained dangerous. Rival cartels constantly challenged him, leading to bloody turf wars that left thousands dead. These conflicts turned parts of Mexico into war zones, with entire towns caught in the crossfire. Guzman's response was always the same: escalate. His brutality knew no bounds, and his willingness to eliminate anyone who threatened his position kept him at the top. As Guzman's empire grew, so did the efforts to bring him down. Mexican and U.S. authorities worked tirelessly to track him, using advanced surveillance techniques and intelligence networks to close in. By 2014, their efforts paid off. Guzman was captured in a dramatic raid in the resort town of Mazatlan, Sinaloa. It was a major victory for law enforcement, and many believed it marked the end of his reign. But Guzman wasn't done yet. In 2015, just a year after his capture, Guzman pulled off another escape, this time from Mexico's most secure prison, Altiplano. The escape was even more audacious than his first. A mile-long tunnel, complete with lights, ventilation, and a modified motorcycle on rails, had been dug from a house outside the prison directly to his cell. Guzman's escape sent shockwaves through the world and further embarrassed the Mexican government. It was clear that as long as Guzman was in Mexico, his power and influence made him nearly untouchable. The world's most notorious drug lord was free once again, and the legend of El Chapo continued to grow. But his freedom wouldn't last forever. The net was closing in, and the forces aligned against him were more determined than ever to end his reign once and for all. Joaquin Guzman's second escape sent shockwaves around the globe. The world's most wanted drug lord had managed to humiliate authorities again, this time with an escape that seemed almost impossible. The tunnel from his cell to freedom was an engineering marvel, nearly a mile long, dug with precision, complete with lighting, ventilation, and even a motorbike mounted on rails to whisk him away. It was a testament to the power of his cartel, capable of pulling off such a feat right under the noses of one of Mexico's most secure prisons. The escape reignited an international manhunt. Guzman was now not just a fugitive but a symbol of the corruption and weakness within the Mexican justice system. The U.S. ramped up its involvement, providing intelligence and resources to track him down. Still, Guzman knew how to disappear. He moved constantly, staying in hidden compounds in the mountains of Sinaloa, his home territory, where locals loyal to the cartel would never betray him. His ability to evade capture relied on a combination of money, fear, and loyalty, cultivated over decades. He knew every road, every escape route, and every person who might pose a threat. But freedom came at a cost. While Guzman was a master at hiding, his empire couldn't afford to stay quiet. The Sinaloa cartel was still a massive operation, smuggling drugs across continents, making billions of dollars, and maintaining its grip on power through violence. The cartel's operations made noise, Drug busts, arrests of key players, and growing pressure from rivals drew attention. Every move the cartel made gave authorities more clues about Guzman's location. The turning point came in early 2016. After months of tracking his associates, monitoring phone calls, and analyzing movements, Mexican authorities finally narrowed down his location to a house in Los Mochis, Sinaloa. It was a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, far from the luxury Guzman had once enjoyed. He was guarded by heavily armed men and surrounded by tunnels and escape routes, but this time, the net was closing too fast. In the early hours of January 8, 2016, a military raid descended on the house. The assault was swift and brutal. Gunfire erupted as Guzman's bodyguards fought to protect him, but they were no match for the heavily armed Mexican Marines. Guzman managed to escape through one of the tunnels connected to the house, but authorities had anticipated this. They tracked him to a nearby road, where he was finally captured. His arrest was met with relief and celebration by law enforcement, both in Mexico and the United States. The world's most dangerous drug lord was in custody again, and this time, they were determined to make sure he stayed there. Guzman's capture sparked immediate calls for his extradition to the United States. Mexican officials, embarrassed by his previous escapes, agreed to transfer him. In 2017, he was extradited to the U.S. to face trial. It was a move that signaled the end of Guzman's ability to manipulate the system. In the U.S., there would be no bribed guards, no secret tunnels, and no escape. The trial of Joaquin Guzman began in November 2018 in New York City. It was one of the most high-profile criminal trials in history, with unprecedented security measures to prevent any attempts at escape or interference. The courtroom was filled with journalists, lawyers, and armed guards. Guzman sat quietly, dressed in a suit, listening as the prosecution unveiled a mountain of evidence against him. The case against Guzman was overwhelming. Prosecutors presented intercepted phone calls, text messages, and testimony from over 50 witnesses, including former cartel members who had turned against him. They described in chilling detail the inner workings of the Sinaloa cartel, its drug shipments, its bribes to politicians and police, and its brutal enforcement tactics. Witnesses recounted how Guzman had personally ordered the murders of rivals and traitors, sometimes watching or participating in the violence himself. One witness, a former cartel lieutenant, described how Guzman had once ordered a man to be tortured and killed because he suspected him of stealing. Another testified about Guzman's paranoia, detailing how he used encrypted phones and elaborate methods to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. The jury also heard about the scale of Guzman's drug empire, which flooded the United States with cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana, earning billions of dollars that were laundered through a complex web of companies and accounts. The evidence was damning, but the trial wasn't without drama. Guzman's lawyers attempted to argue that he was a scapegoat, claiming the real leaders of the cartel were still at large. They pointed fingers at other cartel members, including Guzman's longtime associate, Ismael El Mayo Zambada, who remained free. But the defense's arguments were weak compared to the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution. In February 2019, after 3 months of testimony and deliberation, the jury found Guzman guilty on all 10 charges, including running a continuing criminal enterprise, drug trafficking, and money laundering. It was a moment of triumph for law enforcement and a symbol of justice for the countless victims of his cartel's violence and addiction-fueled devastation. When the judge handed down Guzman's sentence, life in prison plus 30 years, it marked the end of an era. Guzman was also ordered to forfeit $12.6 billion, a sum that reflected the staggering profits of his drug empire. But no amount of money could undo the damage he had caused. Families destroyed by addiction, communities torn apart by violence, and lives lost to the cartel's ruthless operations were scars that would never fully heal. Guzman was sent to ADX Florence, the most secure prison in the United States. Known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, it is a fortress designed to house the country's most dangerous criminals. There, Guzman spends 23 hours a day in solitary confinement, his only contact with the outside world limited to brief visits with his lawyers. For a man who once controlled a global empire, who lived in mansions and traveled in private jets, his life now consists of a small concrete cell with no windows to the outside world. The story of Joaquin Guzman is one of power, ambition, and ultimate downfall. He rose from poverty to become one of the most feared and powerful men in the world, but his greed and violence ensured his own destruction. His name may live on in infamy, but his legacy is a stark reminder that no empire, no matter how powerful, is untouchable. Joaquin Guzman now spends his days in the most secure prison in the United States, ADX Florence, a facility designed to hold the most dangerous and notorious criminals in near-total isolation. Known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, this prison is not just a fortress. It is a place where men like Guzman are stripped of their power, influence, and freedom. For a man who once commanded an empire and instilled fear across nations, this existence must feel like an unimaginable downfall. His days are monotonous and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos and violence that defined his life. He spends 23 hours a day in a small concrete cell, barely larger than a parking space. There's no view of the outside world, just walls, a metal toilet, and a small slit of glass allowing in the faintest bit of light. His meals are delivered through a slot in the door, and his hour of exercise takes place in an isolated concrete yard surrounded by high walls that block any view of the horizon. For a man who once roamed freely across mountains, commanding armies of loyal men, his life is now confined to a routine so strict it's designed to break even the strongest minds. Guzman's communication with the outside world is tightly controlled. Letters, phone calls, and visits are rare, monitored, and carefully restricted. This isolation is intended to prevent him from continuing to run the Sinaloa cartel from behind bars, a fear that was very real during his time in Mexican prisons. At ADX Florence, no such connections are possible. He is cut off from the very organization that once made him one of the most powerful men in the world. Despite his imprisonment, Guzman's influence and story continue to make waves. Even now, there are whispers of his resentment toward powerful figures who played a role in his capture and conviction. Reports have suggested that Guzman holds a personal grudge against former U.S. President Donald Trump, who was vocal about cracking down on drug cartels during his presidency. There are even claims that Guzman at one point wanted Trump dead, allegedly instructing his network to look into targeting him. The audacity of such a plan, if true, shows that even in isolation, Guzman's mind remains as defiant as ever. But what does this say about the power he still holds in his own eyes, even if the world has moved on without him? The story of Joaquin Guzman doesn't end with him sitting in a cell. His imprisonment hasn't dismantled the Sinaloa cartel. In fact, his absence has created a dangerous power vacuum. His sons, collectively known as Los Chapitos, along with other key figures like Ismael El Mayo Zambada, continue to fight for control. These struggles have led to violent turf wars and rising bloodshed in Mexico. Guzman may no longer lead the cartel, but the legacy of violence and corruption he built is alive and thriving. The question remains, was justice truly served? Guzman is behind bars for the rest of his life, but the damage he caused has left scars that can't simply heal with his incarceration. The drugs he smuggled, the lives destroyed by addiction, the communities torn apart by violence. These are problems that persist, with new faces taking his place. What's your opinion? Do you think his conviction made a difference, or was it merely symbolic? Has anything really changed in the world of global drug trafficking, or has the problem just shifted to new players and strategies? For some, Guzman's capture is a victory, a demonstration that no one is above the law. For others, it feels hollow as the cartels continue their operations, flooding streets with drugs and wreaking havoc in vulnerable communities. Guzman may be locked away, but his cartel remains one of the most powerful in the world. Was his downfall a warning to others in the criminal world, Or is he seen as a martyr, proof that anyone who dares to rise to his level must be prepared to pay the ultimate price? The story of El Chapo forces us to confront deeper questions about the drug trade and its impact. His reign was fueled by greed, corruption, and a seemingly insatiable demand for illegal drugs. But where does the blame truly lie? Is it with men like Guzman, who exploited the system to become unimaginably wealthy, or with the system itself, which allowed his empire to thrive for so long? What about the governments and officials who turned a blind eye, taking bribes to protect his shipments? The deeper you dig into his story, the more questions arise, and the answers are rarely simple. As the years pass, Joaquin Guzman fades further into the shadows of his prison cell. His name, once feared and revered, is slowly becoming a part of history. But his story will be told for generations, a reminder of the heights one man can reach through ambition and ruthlessness, and the depths to which he can fall when the world finally catches up. What do you think? Is El Chapo truly defeated? Or does his legacy live on in the billions of dollars, the cartel wars, and the endless supply of drugs that continue to flow across borders? Let us know in the comments below. The story of Joaquin Guzman is far from over, and its impact will be felt for years to come.